Hey kiddos. So this is going to be the first video of me reading you guys a book. Um, if you guys end up liking this book, let me know and I'll keep reading it. If you end up wanting something different or have any other suggestions, just let me know and I can pick out a different book for us to read. So this book is called Call It Courage by Armstrong Sperry. So I'm going to read through the first chapter on here, and then I'll let you guys let me know what you think, if you have any suggestions, and we can go from there. All right. Chapter 1, Flight. It happened many years ago, before the traders and missionaries first came into the South Seas, while the Polynesians were still great in numbers and fierce of heart. But even today, the people of Hikuru sing this story in their chants and tell it over the evening fires. It is the story of Mafatu, the boy who was afraid. They worshipped courage, those early Polynesians, the spirit which had urged them across the Pacific in their sailing canoes before the dawn of recorded history, not knowing where they were going, not caring what their fate might be, still sang its song of danger in the blood. There was only courage, a man who was afraid. What place had he in their midst? And the boy Mafatu, the son of Tavani Nu, the great chief of the Hikuru, always had been afraid. So the people drove him forth, not by violence, but by indifference. Mafatu went out alone to face the things he feared the most, and the people of Hikuru still sing his story in their chants and tell it over the evening fires. It was the sea that Mafatu feared. He had been surrounded by it ever since he was born. The thunder of it filled his ears, the crash of it upon the reef, the mutter of it at sunset, the threat and fury of its storms on every hand, wherever he turned, the sea. He could not remember when the fear of it had first taken hold of him. Perhaps it was during the great hurricane which swept Hikuru when he was a little child of 3. Even now, 12 years later, Mafatu could remember that terrible morning. His mother had taken him out to the barrier reef to search for sea urchins in the reef pools. There were other canoes scattered at the wide intervals along the reef. With the late afternoon, the other fishermen began to turn back. They shouted warnings to Mafatu's mother. It was a season of hurricane, and the people of Hikuru were nervous and ill at ease, charged, it seemed, with an almost animal awareness of impending storm. But when at last Mafatu's mother turned back towards the shore, a swift current had set in around the shoulder of the reef passage, a meeting of the tides that swept like a mill race out into the open sea. It seized the frail craft. In its swift race, despite all of the woman's skill, the canoe was carried on the crest of the churning tide through the reef passage and into the outer ocean. Mafatu would never forget the sound of his mother's despairing cry. He didn't know then what it meant, but he felt that something was terribly wrong, and he set up a loud wailing. Night closed down upon them, swift as a frigate's wing, darkening open the world. The wind of the ocean rushed in at them, screaming. Waves lifted them and struck at one another, their crests hissing and spraying. The poles of the outriggers were torn from their thwarts. The woman sprang forward, seizing her child as the canoe capsized. The little boy grasped. When the cold water struck him, he clung to his mother's neck. Moana, the sea god, was reaching up for them, seeking to draw them down into his dark heart. Off the tip of Hikuru, the uninhabited island of Tekoto lay shrouded in darkness. It was scarcely more than a ledge of coral, almost awash. The swift current bore them directly upon this island. Dawn found the woman still clinging to the pole, and the little boy, his arms locked around his mother's neck. The grim light revealed sharks circling. Little Mafatu buried his head against his mother's cold neck. He was filled with terror. He even forgot the thirst that had burned his throat. But the palms of Tekoto beckoned with their promise of life, and the woman fought on. When at last they were cast up on the pinnacle of coral, Mafatu's mother crawled ashore with scarcely enough strength left to pull her child beyond the reach of the sea. The little boy was too weak to even cry. At hand lay a cracked coconut. The woman managed to press the cool, sustaining meat into her child's lips before she died. Sometimes now, in the hush of the night, when the moon was full, and its light lay in silver bands across the pandanus mats, and all the village was sleeping, Mafatu awoke and sat straight up. The sea muttered its eternal threat to the reef. The sea, and a terrible trembling seized the boy, his limbs shaking, while a cold sweat broke out on his forehead. Mafatu seemed to see again the faces of many fishermen who had found the dead mother and her whimpering child. These pictures still colored his dreams, and so it was that he shuddered when the mighty seas gathered far out, hurled themselves at the barrier reef. Hikuru and the whole island quivered under the assault. Perhaps that was the beginning of it. Mafatu, the boy who had been christened Stout by Heart by his proud father, was afraid of the sea. What manner of fisherman would he grow up to be? How would he ever lead the men in battle against warriors of other islands? Mafatu's fathers heard the whispers, and the man grew silent and grim. The older people were not unkind to the boy, for they believed that it was all the fault of Tapupu, the ghost spirit which possesses every child at birth. But the girls laughed at him, and the boys failed to include them in his failed to include him in their games. And the voice of the reef seemed pitch for his ears alone. It seemed to say, "You cheated me once, Mafatu, but someday, I will claim you." Mafatu's stepmother knew a small sympathy for him, and his stepbrothers treated him with an open scorn. "Listen," they would mock. "Moana, the sea god, thunders on the reef. He is angry with all of us because Mafatu is afraid." The boy learned to turn these jibes aside, but his father's silence shamed him. He tried with all of his might to overcome his terror of the sea. Sometimes, steeling himself against it, he went with Tivana Nui and his stepbrothers out beyond the reef to fish. Out there, where the glassy swells of the ocean lifted and dropped the small canoe, pictures crowded into the boy's mind, setting his scalp a-tingling. Pictures of himself, a babe clinging to his mother's back, sharks cruising, and so overcome would he be at the remembrance of that time that he would drop his spear aboard, or let the line go slack at the wrong moment, and the fish would get loose. It was obvious to everyone that Mafatu was useless upon the sea. He would never earn his proper place in the tribe. Stout Heart, how bitter the name must taste upon his father's lips. So finally, he was not allowed to fare forth as a fisherman. He brought ill luck. He had to stay home making spears and nets, twisting coir, the husks of coconut, into stout shark lines for other boys to use. He became very skillful at these pursuits, but he hated them. His heart was like a stone in the breast. A nondescript yellow dog named Uri was Mafatu's inseparable companion. Uri, with his thin coat which showed his ribs, and his eyes so puzzled and true, he followed the boy wherever he went. Their only other friend was Kiwi, an albatross. The boy had once found the bird on his lonely wanderings. One of Kiwi's feet was smaller than the other, perhaps because it was different from its kind. The older birds were heckling it and pestering and fledgling. Something about the small bird trying to fight off its more powerful fellows touched the boy's heart. He picked it up and carried it home, caught fish for it in the shallow lagoons. The bird followed Mafatu and Uri about, limping on one of its good legs. At length, when the young albatross learned to fly, it began to find its own food. In the air, it achieved perfection, floating serenely against the sky, while Mafatu followed its effortless flight with envious eyes. If only he too could escape to some world far above Hikuru. Now, once more, it was the beginning of the season of storms. Men scanned the skies anxiously, watching for the dreaded signs which might spell the destruction of their world. Soon the great bonitos would be swimming beyond the reef, hundreds and thousands of them, for they came each year at this time with unfailing regularity of the tides. They were held to be the special property of young boys, since it was by killing them that a youth learned to kill the swordfish and the tiger shark, progressing from one stage to another, higher and higher. Every boy in the village sharpened his spear, tested the shaft, honed his shark knife. Every boy that except Mafatu. Kana stepped one afternoon to watch Mafatu work on his nets. All of the youths of his age, Kana alone had been friendly. Sometimes he even stayed behind when the others were fishing to help the boy with his work. The bonitos have begun to run, Mafatu, Kana said quietly. Yes, the others returned, then fell silent. His fingers flattered as they flew among the sennit fibers of the net that he was making. My father brought back word from the reef today, Kana went on. Already there are many bonitos out there. Tomorrow, we boys will be going after them. That's our job. It'll be fun, huh? Mafatu's knuckles whitened. His ears pounded with the swift fury of the sea. That'll be fun, won't it? Kana insisted, watching Mafatu closely. But the boy made no answer. Kana started to speak, and he stopped, turned impatiently, and walked away. Mafatu wanted to cry out after him. Wait, Kana. Wait, I'll go. I'll try. But the words would not come. Kana had gone. Tomorrow, he and all the other boys would be taking their canoes out beyond the reef. They would return at sunset loaded down with bonitos, their faces happy, their shouts filling the dusk. Their fathers would say, see, what a fine fisherman my son has become. He will be a chief of one of these days. Only Tavana Nui would be silent. His son had not gone. That night a new moon rose above the edge of the sea, silvering the land with a bloom of magic. Wandering along the outer beach with Uri, Mafatu heard laughing voices and drew hastily into the black shadows of the Pandanus. A group of boys were pulling their canoes above the high water marks and laying their plans for the morrow. Their voices were shrill with eagerness. Tomorrow at daybreak, one was saying, there'll be Timi and Tapu with Anviri. It's work for all of us. How else will we become fishermen and warriors? How else will we feed our families and keep the tribe alive? True, Hikuru is too poor. There are only fish in the sea. A man must be fearless and to provide food. We will all go, every one of us. Mafatu, standing there, tense in the shadows, heard a scornful laugh. His heart contracted. Not all of us will go, he heard Kana scuff. Not Mafatu. Ha, he's afraid. He makes good spears, offered Viri generously. Ho, that's a woman's work. Mafatu is afraid of the sea. He will never be a warrior. Kana laughed again, and the scorn of his voice was like a spear thrust through Mafatu's heart. Kana was saying, I've tried to be friendly with him, but he is only good for making spears. Mafatu is a coward. The boys disappeared down the moonlit beach. with their laughters floating back on the night air. Mafatu stood quiet and still. Kana had spoke. He had voiced once for all the feeling of the tribe. Mafatu, stout heart, was a coward. He was the boy who was afraid. His hands were damp and cold. His nails dug into his palms. Suddenly, a fierce resentment stormed through him. He knew that instant what he must do. He must prove his courage to himself and to the others, or he could no longer live in their midst. He must face Moana, the sea god. Face him and conquer him. He must. The boy stood there, taut, as a drawn arrow, awaiting its release. Off to the south somewhere were the other islands. He drew a deep breath. If he could win his way to a distant island, he could make a place for himself among strangers, and he would never return to Hikiru until he should have proven himself. He would come back with his head held high in pride, and he would hear his father say, "Here is my son, Stout Heart," a brave name for a boy. Standing there with clenched fist, Mafatu knew a smarting on his eyelids, and shut his eyes tight. He sank his teeth into his lower lip. Far off in the Himene house, the old ones were singing. Their voices filled the night with rich sounds, and they sang of long voyages and open canoes, one of hunger and thirst and battle. They sang deeds of heroes. The hair on the boy's damp forehead stirred. The long-drawn mutter of the reef sounded its note of warning in his ears. At his side, Uri touched the master's hands with his cold nose. Mafatu pulled the dog close. "We're going away, Uri," he whispered fiercely. "Off to the south there are other islands." The outrigger canoes lay drawn up on the beach like slim fish. Silent as a shadow, the boy crossed the sand. His heart was hammering in his throat. Into the nearest canoe he flung half a dozen green drinking nuts, his fish spear. He gave his Peru a brave hitch. Then he picked up the paddle and called Uri. The dog leaped into the bow. There was only Kiwi. Mafatu would miss his albatross. He scanned the dark skies for the sight of the bird, and then gave up and turned away. The lagoon was as untroubled as a mirror. Upon its black face, the stars lay like tracks of fire. The boy shoved off and climbed into the stern. Noiselessly, he propelled the canoe forward, sending it half a length ahead with each thrust of his paddle. As he drew nearer the barrier reef, the thunderous surf increased. The old familiar dreads of it struck at the pit of his stomach and made him falter in his paddling. The voices of the old ones were growing fainter now. The reef thundered, mounted, a long-drawn, hushed, yet mighty sound that seemed to have its being not in the air above, but the very sea beneath. Out beyond the lurking, terrifying world of the water and wind, out there laying everything most to be feared. The boy's hands tightened on the paddle. Behind him lay safety, security from the sea. What matter if he jeered? For a second he almost turned back. Then he heard Kana's voice, once again saying, "Mafatu is a coward." The canoe entered the race formed by the ebbing tide. It caught up the small craft in its turns and swept it forward like a chip on a mill race. No turning back now. The boy was aware of the sudden whir and the fury of the sky above, a beat of mighty wings. Startling, he glanced up. There was Kiwi, his albatross. Mafatu's heart lifted. The bird circled low in the moonlight. Its winged edge was silver. It hovered for a moment just over the bow of the canoe. Then it rose easily, lightly on its effortless flight. Out through the passage in the reef, out into the open ocean. Mafatu gripped the steering paddle and followed. All right, that's the first chapter of Call It Courage. So if you guys like that, let me know what you think. If you guys have any recommendations for any other books, let me know. And if you guys do like this, we'll continue reading it and we'll go on to chapter 2.